attempt to stay on time, and given that whoever joins probably doesn't want to listen to me anyway, I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Grant Swartzwelder, President of OTA Environmental Solutions, and on behalf of OTA and esg-dynamics, we appreciate you joining the Oilfield Strong webinar. We do it monthly, as you all know, on the first Wednesday of each month at 1:30, and try to have an interesting speaker talking about either environmental or operational, everything kind of energy. I think we definitely have that today with Richard Brantley, who I've known quite some time. And I know while he's not the top guy at University Lands, I think anytime you think, especially out in West Texas, anytime you think of University Lands, I always think, and I think most people always think of Richard. It's he's been with them. I guess you're the most senior professional there. I guess that means you've got gray hair and wisdom, and we'll take that, won't we? But obviously, University Lands is a key player in the oil industry, one that a lot of people don't really understand the importance of. With over 2 million acres under management, 19 counties. Obviously, the funds of which, the proceeds of which go to fund universities in Texas. Unfortunately, a big chunk goes to University of Texas. Richard, we need to work and try to get a little bit more to A&M, but that maybe is a separate conversation there. But, and based on your response, I think I know how you'll come out on that. So no, seriously, Richard, really appreciate you coming. And so let's start off for those that maybe don't understand all University Lands and how kind of what your role really is. If you would, I'll throw out this general intro about explain how y'all fit into the oil industry and how y'all work and kind of the role you play.
Sure. Well, let me just say, first of all, Grant, thank you for having the opportunity to just spend a little time with everyone and visit today, and like keep this very casual. But in regard to University Lands, and I'll just give you a little perspective. I lived in Midland 20 years and had been on a lot of university leases working in the oil and gas industry that said university on them. Didn't really understand what that meant until I got into this role. And as I came into University Lands, I certainly worked in the field and kind of worked my way up. But to give everybody a little bit of perspective, back when Texas was yet a republic, they had aspirations for higher education. Texas had some land resources that had no money, and but they decided to set some land aside. The first set aside was in North Texas. They set aside 50 leagues of land, about 200,000 acres, for the benefit of higher education. And then as things happened, this was in the 1840s. Texas became a state in 1846. And then the Civil War came along in the 1850s and early 60s. And then, it sort of got sidetracked for a number of years. But in 1876, when Texas actually wrote its constitution, they set aside land for the benefit of higher education within the Constitution. There was 1 million acres set aside at that time. And then subsequently in 1883, the legislature set aside another 1 million acres. Now, this was a pretty common practice back in those days. Texas had a lot of land, they had no money. And one of the things that you'll note that I think is important, Texas is largely private land. There's only about 95% of the land in Texas is privately owned. And this land was never severed from the state of Texas, which makes the title very pure and sovereign. And so as things rolled forward, then it was set aside to the benefit of the University of Texas Board of Regents, and then Texas A&M was also in that role. And there's a long backstory about all that and how it got sorted out. But that's where it is. It's in West Texas. This 200 leagues that I described earlier. After the Civil War, they started looking back at that. A lot of that land had been homesteaded. This is back over east where it rains. And the desert Southwest was yet to be occupied. So when they did identify, again, land for the 2 million acres, they sent surveyors to find unoccupied land out of the public domain. And largely what was left was in West Texas. Little did we know that it held these bountiful resources. So it is quite an operation out here. We've got about 40 people in Midland. I've got about 13 in Houston, and collectively we manage 2.1 million acres. There's about, like Grant said, it's in 19 different counties. Not all those are oil producing provinces, but we take care of it all, with great honor and great pride.
And when you're talking the acreage, that's surface and minerals?
Yes, it's fee simple. Yeah, it's never severed. And that's one of the things that enables us to manage it so closely, is that we control the surface and the minerals. And so virtually everything that happens on these lands, we authorize.
And so is your effort more, when I think of university lands, I think about more oil production and therefore minerals. Is that really what's the mix between on the revenue side or activity side on surface activities? There's been a lot on sand and water, and are y'all pushing that, or is it more focused on downhole mineral?
Yeah, certainly, as things have evolved, and it is fundamentally notable, I think, that people would find it interesting that the first commercially operative well was drilled on university lands as the Santa Rita #1 down near Texon, and this was in 1993. And so anyway, that sort of started this westward expansion out from the first, the most westward development up until that time was the W.H. Abrams well over near Westbrook. And it only produced a few barrels a day. The Santa Rita produced about 100 barrels a day, so it incentivized people to move further west in this exploration. But back to your question about the revenue mix, we're probably about 90%, 92 or 3% mineral revenue, and then the balance of that is the surface revenue. And it's important to note that the mineral revenue, all of the depletable resources go to the Permanent University Fund, which is an endowment that's invested by UTEMCO, and then those dollars are distributed about on a 5% per year basis. All the surface revenue and activity, which involves caliche, water, renewables, grazing, big portion of this is easements and rights of way, generate money that go to the available university fund, and those funds are more readily available, as the title suggests, to be utilized in the next calendar year budget.
And that's available for universities, or is that available for the general kind of legislative?
It's available for it's the same way as the PUF. It's split just the same way the PUF is.
Okay, so both are used for universities.
Yeah, between the University of Texas system and the Texas A&M system, and as those in the audience will recognize, really as Texans, we're all direct or indirect beneficiaries of this, educational and medical resource. You might not think about it, but like all combined, there's like 22 universities or medical schools or dental schools or something like that. Things like MD Anderson down in Houston is part of the University of Texas. As we all know, Texas A&M has like 12 or 13 campuses. They got a campus in Qatar, and they run the 5 state agricultural programs. So really, it's a broad network of education and healthcare that we all can benefit from.
Explain also, because I believe all of fee simple, if I wasn't a landman, and I'll prove that out in this comment, but y'all own the minerals. So so as far as the control you have, and that's probably a bad choice word, how you work with oil companies in y'all's position owning the minerals, but you also own the land and the right of way. Explain that, because you're kind of a landlord, but you're not a working interest owner.
Yeah.
So you probably have some controls.
Yeah. The best description, we're the landlord steward out here. We're taking care of this on behalf of the universities. And as far as the way we work with the oil and gas operators, you may or may not know that we have oil and gas lease sales. Used to be twice a year, but they've become a little less frequent. But EnergyNet, posts those up and manages that activity for us these days. We'll have another one in October of this year, I believe October the 18th. Anybody wants to follow along with that, we've got postings on our website that announce that presently. But when we have an oil and gas lease sale, you know, leases or there's a track list that's posted, and you know, minimum bids and minimum royalties and all those sorts of things like that. You get a 3-year term to go. If you're the successful high money bidder, then you win the opportunity typically to go in and develop those minerals. Now, the oil and gas lease affords ingress and egress. It does, you know, report that operators will abide and pay for caliche and water and things like that, relative to what we call the University Lands Rate and Damage Schedule, which is also posted on our website. And it's, you know, Grant, that sort of provides us with a very efficient process. You know, we've got so many leases. There's about 3,600 oil and gas leases on university lands, and about 300, or, you know, plus or minus between 275 and 300 oil and gas operators, individual operators. There's over 100 grazing tracts out there. I've got about 15,000 or so easements and rights of way. We've got solar farms, wind farms, just almost everything you can imagine, including public schools and convenience stores and things like that on these lands. So we do actually control who gets to, you know, access those lands by contract. You know, sometimes people will propose things that aren't beneficial to the university, and so we'll take a pass on those. But we're open for business. We like to conduct commerce, and really, as you know, we differ somewhat from, we're a department of the University of Texas system, University Lands is, but we differ from them primarily because all of our day-to-day activities with, you know, outside commercial engagement, and a lot of the internal departments at UT system are, you know, dealing internally with the UT system business.
Okay. So when you're talking oil and gas and kind of the responsibility or the obligation that a company might have, I found it interesting when we were talking previously that there's really not a drilling requirement as in wells. It's more of a, I guess because of the explosion of unconventional, it's more of a lateral footage.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain kind of that responsibility or how those leases work?
You bet. As folks on the call may know, you know, if you take, you know, the track list that we'll put up in October, I believe, is about 600 tracks. These tracks are typically, you know, in it from a quarter section to, you know, full sections. People will lease those, you know, those tracks on an individual lease basis, and as you likely know, you've got 3 years to go in and establish production, and then continuously develop that track until it's fully developed. This lateral footage obligation, well, let me back up and just say this. You know, if you got a whole bunch of, you know, separate leases out there, you got to hop a drilling rig around and try to manage that timeline, and the timeline can get very, you know, challenging, given that there are limited rigs and, you know, just moving them around. So in about 2017, the concept of lateral footage obligation came along. And in previous years, you know, a lot of the old oil and gas leases just said, you know, as long as you spud the well, then you've commenced drilling. And sometimes games would be played with that. But now our leases, in our particularly our what we'd call our drilling and development units, where we aggregate leases into larger blocks, provided that people own all those leases, require lateral footage obligations, where the company has to drill and complete so many thousand feet of horizontal footage on a per year basis or for a window of time. And that it just works better in our favor to be able to forecast, you know, production and revenues that are going to be coming in, and it obligates the companies to be a little bit more direct in their execution.
So when you say there's a couple of things about the sales that coming up. You say it used to be 2 times a year, but it's not as much. Why is that? Did the strategy change?
Well, yeah, okay, excuse me.
No, go ahead, and then I'll ask.
Well, okay, yeah. So, if we all go back to about 2008, okay, so we're rocking along, everybody's doing vertical wells. And as you may recall, EOG came into West Texas. EOG had been out here a long time, but they took some tracts in Erie County. And, we kind of look in hindsight, we watched all this happen, didn't really realize what was going on. But I had some landmen I dealt with at that time with EOG, and this, the Barnett Shale had evolved, and then the Eagleford had happened. And these landmen, confidentially would tell me that, we're really seeing in the Permian here, we're seeing better metrics as far as ductility and total carbon content and things like that than we did in the Eagleford. And so we're rocking along 2008. We have a sale in the spring of 2009. Our sales previously, folks, had been like, $5, $8, $10,000 or $10 million on lease bonus. And we had one time that went to 37 million. We kind of thought we'd made a mistake somewhere, but anyway, it was all correct. But anyway, we rolled up to a lease sale in spring of 2009, and we had adequate interest and everything. But when we started opening the bids that next morning, this was all back when it was a little bit more of a manual process. I won't have this number right, but it was north of $200 million of bonus. So what had happened was that this word had gotten out, and it suddenly became a land play, and everybody's just trying to get a place on the playground. And so subsequently, like 3 lease sales in a row, we had lease bonuses of over $200 million. And then, all of a sudden, most of the, prospective land was leased up, and it stayed that way for a while. So now we're having some tracts come back. But yeah, at one point in time, in fact, we've still got about 1,300,000 under lease, I believe. But that number kind of keeps, it keeps dropping off as tracts return to our inventory. But it really wasn't anything other than just supply and demand. We just didn't have any supply.
And so when you say 600 tracts up in October, those are tracts that have been returned.
Yes, yeah, returned, yeah, that are available for bid. Yes.
So if companies are continuing to drill, then there's just no availability, and thus no need for auctions.
Yeah. If they continuously develop these, and just with all the activity out there, and sometimes things change for different companies as far as their capital, sponsorship and things like that. They may not be able to get to it, but like I said, after 3 years, or if they drill for a while and they discontinue development, then those undeveloped tracts return to our inventory. And then we've got a whole fleet of landmen that go through them, make sure everything's square and it's available for auction.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier the issue with supply chain and access to drilling rigs. How that's affected everyone in the oil industry. And so they have this drilling obligation, but then, finding pipe, finding rigs. How have you dealt with the kind of the shortages out of labor and supplies that exist out there?
Well, we rely on good developers to figure those solutions out. We again, everybody understands that the dynamics of this business, and it can be feast or famine, as we all know. But we don't really get into the weeds too much on limits of drilling rigs or materials and things like that. Just expect that people can honor their obligations. There may be times when that gets to be a challenge. We try to work with people, but again, the lease is the lease, and the development clause is the development clause. So.
Okay, and it's kind of a similar theme on ESG. Obviously, the environmental issues have really increased. You see different universities under pressure on how they're handling ESG. So I'm sure University of Texas and Texas A&M are not exempt from that. So how has that affected how University Lands approaches its business?
Well, it certainly been around as long as I have. You remember back in the early 90s when the word environmental began to be kind of a day-to-day word in our business, and I see this ESG as the same. Certainly, I had an environmental background when I came to work for University Lands, and we've always, focused heavily on the soil and groundwater, issues that might manifest or be caused, and address those. And then with the advent of the FLIR camera, the infrared technologies, and the ability to monitor emissions and all this LDAR programs and things like that, we've certainly enrolled that to a greater degree. We've got an OpGal camera that we use, and we routinely, we always have kind of ongoing, spill remediation type things. And I think, the guys reported to me this morning, I think we've had 744 spills this year. Now, some of those are as small as a few gallons, and some of them are bigger than that. But those that require remedial actions, we don't actually operate anything ourselves, and we look to the responsible party to tend to that, and so we keep a pretty close handle on it. And I'd just say that we don't promulgate any regulations. There's enough regulations out there for all of us, and so whatever the regulatory requirements are from the Railroad Commission or the TCQ, we just engage the company and point to those regulations. And this, we need to follow this too. And we even escort these companies to the regulatory bodies. We go to Austin routinely to meet with the regulatory oversight team, with the responsible party, collectively. And we find that the regulatory entity is typically more comfortable making a decision in those moments. I think they gain some benefit from the landowner's presence, from the landowner acknowledgement. Yeah, that sounds good. Now, we know in the environmental space, groundwater contamination, you never get it, totally resolved, but we do, restricted covenants and closures like that. Once it's been demonstrated that there's no further risk to, health and human safety and that sort of thing. But we moved into that the gaseous emissions, phase, just like everybody else has. And we work with the companies, we work with the operators. We're not trying to be the police out there. Hey, we saw a leak or whatever, we're going to call the Railroad Commission. We go to the company and say, hey, here's an issue. We're all kind of collective partners in this, and we're all on that learning curve of the emissions aspect of it, I would say.
But it does sound like it's a fine balance in that you let the operator operate, but by y'all having an OGI camera and kind of watching, you're not necessarily being landlord or big brother, but you're floating around out there also.
Right, yeah.
So it's kind of a balance.
One of the things I would suggest that causes us to be a little different than, we've got a real long time horizon. Centuries, as opposed to each of us individually would have our own 30-year, kind of professional career horizon. But the universities, have this, centuries and multi-centuries, this intergenerational fairness. We're here to take care of these lands now so that those who come after us can take care of those. One of the things I think is different about University Lands is that if somebody has a spill out there or has an issue, we don't get dollar signs in our eyes and try to extort that moment to, hey, you need to pay us some money and it'll dry up these tears here. We want you to clean it up to regulatory standards, and let's all get back to doing what we do best, okay? But we need to prosecute this and execute efficiently and not just let it drag on and drag on. So that's kind of the way we go about it. We, like I said, we don't make our money from one-off incidents, for sure.
Sure. Well, with y'all owning the land and the minerals, and then kind of some of the public pressures and all, it's, air emissions have been kind of forefront.
Yeah.
But you could argue that what's happening, downhole with water and contamination of water spills, that's as important, if not more so, but it doesn't seem to get as much press. Since y'all are involved with all of the above, since you own the land and and have all these stakeholders. How do you look at that, and how, obviously it's all important, but do you see one kind of as a larger issue, a bigger thing to worry about than another?
Well, certainly the groundwater issues exist. I'm very proud of our track record in that arena, in that we've got all but about 2 of them, closed out with a regulatory notice of no further action. And so we work very hard on those, continuously on those. In the scheme of things, as far as water and I mean, these are teardrop spots out there. There's hardly any of them that are more than just a few acres, but all important. And many times in West Texas, as some of the folks on the call may know, I mean, you're dealing with perched water zones, and that the water quality is 10,000 parts TDS or things like that. It's not into the major aquifers, but if it is, I mean, we go get it. And then there may be some, like I said, restrictive covenants that are filed of record to travel with the title of the land. Just say that you can't drill. I mean, this is after exhaustive remediation, but that you can't install a household water well or a public school or something in this little dot. Now we can still drill through it to go for the minerals. You just have to, case it off, just like they would any other water zone.
Sure.
But in as far as the importance, I mean, certainly there's no greater resource or valued asset than water. But there are public pressures, and there's a disproportionate focus on this. As far as the air and the emissions, and I think it's just a lot of dissatisfaction with the current regulatory regime from certain environmental groups, and then they're them taking direct actions to call these out and call companies out for their operations. So it's don't know that anything would ever be totally in balance, but that seems to be the hot topic of the day. Of course, it's very visible. You can see the flares, you can see, and with the infrared cameras, you can see the effects of the methane and the fugitive emissions.
Yeah. Well, and so much, especially like Delaware Basin with H2S, it's also more harmful.
Yes, no,
so it's definitely more visible, and then water and contamination, that's downhole and you can't see, and you're usually not worried about the things you can't see. So,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you mentioned 744 spills, which sounds like a lot, but then you mentioned kind of size. I know Railroad Commission has certain size. Are y'all consistent with that? The way you talked, it made it sound like it could even be just anything as a spill.
Yeah, some companies just have requirements that 2 drops hit the ground, we're going to report it. And so and that's there's not a real consistent approach to that company by company. And so some companies, they have a lot of spills reported. The volume is fairly insignificant, but it's the Railroad Commission has a 5 barrel threshold, and we have them report to us with the HH, what actually happened out there. As soon as we find out about it, we go on the site and surveil and see what they've done. We've also to kind of weave into that overview, we've got drones these days that we can launch and actually map the perimeter of a spill. And we've got 2 that are in operation right now, where people had to do significant remedial work. For soil contamination of produced water, we require a dig and haul approach. You might probably know that sodium chloride on the ground and all the other inorganics is very detrimental.
Yep.
We've not found anybody that's got the magic potion to put that to put on it or anything. So we require dig and haul and then replace the overburden with typically material from another source or a clean source.
Okay. And I should have mentioned this earlier. If you do have a question for Richard, he's very open to taking any, and should have mentioned this earlier, but there's a chat button if you do want to jump in real quick. We're close to the end, so apologize that you need to hurry and do that. To give you time also, and before everyone leaves, I want to also let everyone know I'm chair of the UTPB Engineering Advisory Board, and we are having a reception for all graduates and alumni of the engineering college for UTPB in September. And so I'd welcome I'll send out to everyone the attendance information, but UTPB is so important for all the Permian Basin as far as providing engineers and support. So if you have folks that are graduates, I think it'd be great if they attended that, and we support UTPB. So there's the commercial, Richard. Sorry about that, to take your time there, but
No, that's plenty good. I'll add on to that if I could, Grant.
yes,
So
please.
I'm a board member on the Permian Basin Water and Energy Advisory Board, and we do this, annual seminar typically in February, and that is also, owned and operated by UTPB, and all the proceeds, excess proceeds from that seminar and conference, it's typically a 2-day conference, go to support the John Ben Shepherd Leadership Institute at UTPB. And so anyway, again, very important, like Grant said, this school is very important to our community and to our industry, and their capacity, as you may know, they've added, petroleum and chemical engineering, landman program over there, electrical engineering. This is typically, utilized by individuals that live here in the Permian Basin. Maybe they're going back for the kind of a second, swing at the plate for education. But one of the biggest challenges we have is trying to move people out here. If you're here, you're integrated in the community. UTPB is a great fit for those that are going back for education later in life.
Well, and moving them out here, but also keeping them out here.
Yeah,
with most of them having families here, they're more likely to stay. And,
they're
already
already
populate that. So it's no, that's fantastic. We get 2 commercials in for the price of one. So I like that. It's anything kind of on the last comment. I don't see any chat questions, but kind of going forward, is there any kind of rules or changes or anything that you foresee within University Lands and how it'll kind of go forward, or is it business as usual?
No, I think it's pretty much business as usual. We do have a new CEO, Billy Murphy. He offices out of Houston. He's formerly legal counsel and kind of, commercial business manager for the King Ranch. He was down there about 10 or 12 years. So another big landowner operator, perspective. And I think that's going to be very good for us in the near and short term. But no, we operate every day, and with success in mind. What we want, what I hope to achieve is to enable everybody that we contract with to be successful doing what they're trying to do out there. One of the things that we spend a bit of time doing is trying to monitor the playing field, if you will, and make sure that people are not, treading on other people's, ability to pursue their needs. And we do that in a large way. We've got great GIS systems and mapping systems. We've got field people that are designated in regional areas, so they know that like their backyard. And what we try to do is just if somebody needs something, we try to efficiently help them get that as quick as they can. And with our ownership of the surface and the minerals, it's a single office operation. Let me just explain one thing. Because it is owned in large contiguous tracts, and you may have seen a map, but a person needing a right of way or one of these cross country pipelines, we probably had 8 or 10 of these cross country pipelines going from the Delaware to the Gulf Coast in the last 4 or 5 years. But with one instrument, they can come to University Lands and go 50 or 60 miles, as opposed to having to change landowners every 1.5 miles or 3, and undivided interest owned by some cousins that don't get along and things like that. And so I believe that we offer a very efficient and effective solution if it's needed for people out there that need rights of ways and access or surface contracts of any type.
I think University Lands has a reputation of being very sensible in how they conduct business, and I attribute a lot of that to you and your leadership. So I think that's it helps promote development and business out there. So thanks for that.
Sure.
It's well, it is 2:07, so trying to keep in our 30-minute window, which I've completely messed up already again. But Richard, thank you very much for participating. Everyone, we will post this later today or on YouTube. So if you have someone that wants to hear this presentation again, wants to understand, I think this is very helpful to give an overview of what University Lands does and how it works. So thank you, Richard. Appreciate your time, and look forward to seeing you soon.
All right. Thank you, Grant.
Bye-bye.